So I think I've been able to synthesize these areas of religion, kind of science, technology, politics, the whole kind of broad worldview is exactly because I sort of left the system.
Welcome to the Light Ages, where we explore our potential and go off-piste on the slopes of the sacred mountains. I'm Ali Amorosan. I'm seeking today's most interesting minds to help overcome what some have called the meta crisis, and inviting us all to co-create a protopic vision, Weltanschauung, for the 21st century and beyond. I first came across the work of Wei H. Tsang in around 2012 when he released a couple of lectures on YouTube, one titled The Fractal Brain Theory and the Unification of Neuroscience with AI and Psychology, and the other called Revolutionary Movements and How to Start One. It was clear to me that here is someone with a broad range of interests, but also the ability to arrive at novel conclusions and articulate them in a compelling manner. Wei is an independent researcher known for the fractal brain theory and has recently released a new series of lectures revealing more of his thinking on brain science, artificial intelligence, consciousness, metaphysics, and nothing less than the unification of science and religion in his Fractal Theory of Reality. He's the author of two books, The Fractal Brain Theory and a book titled Quest, which I've not read yet, but I just want to read out the blurb for it. This book is about a 21st century mythic adventure and spiritual odyssey, a real-life Dan Brown novel where science meets reality, the mystical meets the mundane, and the esoteric or hidden is made manifest. More mind-bending than the Matrix movie, and as strange as any Philip K. Dick take. This is a true story of one man's quest to understand the nature of mind, brain, and consciousness, during the course of which he discovers the nature of the universe and the divine. I think this will be a very stimulating conversation. And with that, let's welcome Wei H. Tsang. So, hello, Wei. I know I didn't pronounce your name right then. Is that right, Wei?
Absolutely fine. Yeah, that sounds good to me.
Thanks. So cool. So there's so many areas we could explore. We could probably go on for hours and hours. And I hope this doesn't jump around too much for people. I've got a lot of questions to ask, so maybe we'll need a part two if you're up for it. I know you've said that there's some areas that we're going to take a long time to describe, so let's leave those for a later date if you want. So I'm going to be following my notes, but I don't want that to stop us going off piste and exploring some unexpected territory if it comes up.
Great.
So people will have heard my brief introduction, but could you give us a little insight into your personal background and how you came to walk the path you're on and what's unique about it?
My personal background, what's unique, Oliver, is essentially, I guess what's unique is that I left the system. Now, basically, I was going to do, PhD in artificial intelligence, but this is back in 1988, and essentially, I kind of deviated from the normal path. That's 30 years ago. So if you imagine someone actually leaves the system, of kind of putting himself in academia or some corporate lab, and then goes on this kind of renegade journey for 30 years. He learns different things. So I guess that's my unique selling point. I guess what's happened is basically look, I think I've got unique answers to many things, and a lot of these things you've heard in the talks you've attended. And the reason why I have these unique answers is because, okay, basically a career in an academic or corporate lab, with all due respect to people working in academia and the corporate research field, it is basically you're putting yourself in a box. This is to do with specialization. It's to do with how academia is organized. It's to do with how corporate labs are organized. You specialize, and there's a kind of a PhD 3-4 years. There's a narrowing of the mind, which is great for adding on some addition to some existing field. But in terms of finding answers to problems which necessarily involve jumping out of the box, it's very, very difficult. So I think I've been able to synthesize these areas of religion, kind of science, technology, politics, the whole kind of broad worldview is exactly because I sort of left the system. And I kind of, in a sense, I've been lucky because I've always been I've been doing talks in London for the past 20 years now. In fact, the last talk was the 20th anniversary. So I've been very lucky in that I've always had an audience. And in a sense, basically, I've been motivated to basically generate this worldview for an audience, which has been lay, but very, very smart. Do you see what I mean? So basically, I've been in a process of basically kind of outside the system, but actually also talking to people within the system, also various kinds of people, political people, scientists, technologists. So I have this kind of unique path and unique angle on things. And I think that is really why I'm in my situation today and why I have really unique answers to some of these really big questions I think we'll be exploring in this interview.
So how much was that a conscious decision way back when you were beginning to study?
Yes, I mean, in a sense, I mean, it wasn't university. It really was, I guess it was, I sort of left the system at age 13, 14 by skipping school. I realized my brain has been wasted in these classrooms where basically you just weren't learning at a kind of adequate rate. So basically, I discovered in my early teens that by actually going renegade, I could actually learn far more on my own than actually going to school. Now university-wise, I was really happy to actually knuckle down and do the degree and do the PhD. Now, what happened to me back in 1988, 1991, okay, was essentially the situation with artificial intelligence, which was my chosen field. You got to understand. It's not like mathematics or physics, because all the stuff that's taught in artificial intelligence back in '88, it is all dustbin of history. Did you get it? So I realized even back then that basically by doing this PhD path, I would have learned expert systems, support vector machines, maybe kind of like Igor Alexander stuff, a bit of back propagation, which has had a resurgence in the past few years, but even that's going dustbin of history now, I believe. So by actually realizing at that stage, basically, that the kind of research path in artificial intelligence was a dead end, I guess it was at that point, actually before starting the degree, because the summer before starting the artificial intelligence degree, basically I read up all the stuff, and I realized the state of the art, what was being taught in universities, was really like a dead end. So I guess it began there. And that's where my research into the brain and artificial intelligence really began, separate from the kind of academic path.
Yeah, amazing. So your work seems to cover quite a wide range of disciplines, from theology, consciousness, neuroscience to AI, and even activism. So if there's a goal to your work, what is it?
Interesting question. I mean, I have to answer this in two stages, because the original goal, Oliver, the original goal was to create true artificial intelligence and become the next Steve Jobs. I mean, and that sounds, you're kind of a very ambitious teenager, and you kind of like, you feel you have this confidence that you could master subjects on your own, that you always did well in school, even though you never went to school. You always came, top of the exams with very little work. You had this kind of confidence to do stuff. And I guess now people want to become the next Elon Musk now, don't they? But back then, back in the 80s, it was like you become the next Steve Jobs, Bill Gates. And the original plan was basically figure out how the brain works, create true artificial intelligence from it, and then basically become the next Steve Jobs. And that sounds really kind of like really maybe overconfident, but it had this kind of like teenage energy, which really it just seemed totally doable to me. And that sounds maybe even slightly arrogant to talk like that. What happened was, in my deviant path, it became very deviant, and basically I left the system and ended up in this really kind of like I guess, renegade situation, living in North London's kind of counterculture, degenerate underbelly, land of psychedelia, land of kind of like bohemian life, musicianship. I played in bands and stuff, did music thing, and the whole kind of psychedelic thing really gave me this kind of insight. I guess I don't want to sound, I guess it's like a spiritual awakening. You have these experiences on these substances, like many people have done, in recent history. And then it was this experience of being one with the universe or being one with God. And by my late 20s, the work on the brain and the AI's work still continued, but there was a wider agenda. And then, this thing called Saturn return. I used to laugh at these old hippies talking about Saturn return, that in your late 20s, you're going to find out what you can do the rest of your life. And there really was this kind of like Saturn return reckoning of kind of like, what am I going to do? Then I realized the higher goal became to communicate these experiences, communicate this experience of being one with the universe, or one with God. So, but that became the higher goal. But then the work with the AI stuff continued over time. I guess the goal now is to basically create true artificial intelligence, commercialize it, bring it into the world, and use that as a platform for communicating the religious ideas. And then in turn, use that as a platform to continue to communicate the, as you say, the activists, I guess, political ideas. I guess that's the long-term overall goal. And that sounds like pretty wacky and, far-fetched, but that is what we're doing.
Yeah, no, it's interesting because you're sort of combining this this idea of progress in science and AI with this activist edge, and like you say, there is a political side to it, and that's often hidden in the agendas of people who are making progress in technology, although it's always there underlying, and we're left to infer what that might be. And you're being quite open and transparent about, hey, this is what I'm about. This is the wide-ranging scope of my work, which is really refreshing, I think.
Right. I mean, the thing is, in my journey, once you have this truth, it kind of really just seared into your brain, this kind of esoteric, I guess, religious, spiritual idea that I kind of picked up really from the land of the Lotus Eaters. I mean, I'm quite open about this from my journeys in the land of psychedelia. Then as my journey, I was giving all these talks in London, and basically I'd see the deep connection between this esoteric dimension and politics. Political scientists, they recognize that there is this deep esoteric dimension, but they can't go there. So they recognize, Plato's Republic, the most influential political text of all time, there's an esoteric dimension. Philosopher King leaves the cave of illusions, returns to the cave, leads society to the good. That's mystical dimension. We can go on Oration on the Dignity of Man, Francis Bacon's New Atlantis, of course the Bible's influence on the Western world, etc. Hegel, Marx. What happened for me personally is that basically in my journey, I've always been very interested in politics. I joined all the dots. So I read up on all these revolutionary movements in all of China, all these different parts of the world over the past 1,000 years. And I found this esoteric dimension. And then I investigated the roots of kind of like our political systems. Again, I found this kind of like esoteric foundation and core from which they were derived. So I guess by synthesizing this knowledge, then I realized, oh my God, I had a unique insight, which basically many people don't have. So, and it was from giving these talks to kind of movements like Occupy from way back now, 10, 12 years ago, that I found a ready audience for my political ideas as well. So that became like an offshoot. But in recent years, that's really grown. So the most recent talk I gave was really about what everyone's asking. What is that new worldview? What is that new narrative that can really, cause a system change or some kind of great reset or some kind of revolution to happen, and a whole bunch of other stuff. So I guess the political stuff really came out of the esoteric dimension, and it became a kind of like another kind of emergent sub-goal from the religious goal and the technological goal.
Mm. Yeah, great. So without jumping ahead then, is your fractal brain theory a good place to start, or is there a better place to jump in to the technical side of it?
That's a great place because really, I guess where most of my life has gone the past 30 years is reading neuroscience. So deciding that the existing ways of doing artificial intelligence were just inadequate. They basically were wrong. I decided that at age 18. Then the path for me became true AI would be created from a true understanding of the brain and through neuroscience. So that really led to, kind of like my investigations into the brain and became this kind of fractal brain theory. Now, it's just a kind of label, really. I mean, what it is really the application of this key idea called symmetry to understanding the brain. So symmetry really is the kind of, if you had to sum up science in one word, then that word should be symmetry, really. It's about, kind of decomposing vast areas of complexity into very succinct mathematical objects. That's what essentially symmetry is, invariant objects with shapes that can describe a whole host of things. That's a kind of layman's accessible description of symmetry.
Yeah, so is symmetry synonymous with the concept of the equation, like the equals and symmetry because they're equal on both sides?
Well, yeah. I mean, I guess it goes. I mean, there's an equality equation where two things on separate sides of the equation will seem vastly different. But that's a kind of deepest kind of mathematical symmetry. To keep things kind of accessible, symmetry is really about it's about transformation and invariance. Okay, you can do transformations with mathematical equations, and there'll be like what's called invariance. Now you can take a shape, if you transform it in certain ways, then it looks the same. The classic school example, you get a square, you kind of rotate it 90 degrees and it still looks like a square. Rotate it 180 degrees, still looks like a square. You take a square, you flip it in the mirror, and then it looks like a square. It's to really, in the broadest possible terms, to explain symmetry is really about transformation and invariance. Okay, something is transformed, but something is immune to that transformation. So something is changed, but something stays the same. So in broadest possible terms, that is symmetry and invariance. Now, the idea of symmetry as applied to the brain is the idea that the complexity, the stupendous complexity of the brain is stupendously complex. It's the idea that there is an underlying utter simplicity behind that complexity. So that's symmetry. There's a basic shape, if you like, a basic pattern, a basic template that explains the entire brain. Now, the idea of fractal is essentially, another way of saying fractal is self-similarity or self-symmetry, a recursively nested pattern that's the same. Okay, so what we believe is that the fractal brain theory is essentially describing a single symmetry or pattern that really explains even synapses to neurons, to cortical columns, to patches of the brain, to the entire brain. So essentially a single symmetry that decomposes the entire brain. I know people think that sounds completely wild until they realize, okay, that the brain, your mind, your entire life actually emanates from a single unbroken symmetry. It's called a fertilized egg. Once you realize that, the idea is not so ridiculous, is it?
And as humans, obviously, we are symmetrical. The brain has two halves, but it goes further than that, right?
Exactly. Yes. Exactly. I mean well, actually, the fractal brain theory now has gone far, far further, because actually, the next talk I'll be giving in about a month's time, I'll share some links at the end of this talk. The fractal brain theory became something far more in the past 10 years, actually, since my first outings on satellite TV and videos came out back about 10, 12 years ago. What the brain theory shows now is not merely a symmetry decomposing the brain and mind. This symmetry also decomposes how the genome works. Now, the genome is basically, what's in a fertilized egg that computes a body. Okay, basically a fertilized egg becomes a body through ontogenesis. The fractal brain theory has become something far, far deeper. It shows a symmetry between a brain and a genome. And that sounds wild, doesn't it? And further than that, it shows a symmetry between what we understand as life and intelligence. Now, Einstein's famous E equals mc squared. I mean, basically, he wanted to call the theory of relativity invariance theory, because it basically showed an invariance or symmetry between matter and energy. I know it sounds really like a bold claim, but this is something I can explain in minute detail. Is the idea basically, just as matter and energy are fundamental properties of the universe, and there's a symmetry between them, as Einstein's famous theory has demonstrated. That's why we have nuclear power and stuff, and all these kind of like technologies from this equation. The fractal brain theory has become something far deeper. It shows a symmetry between the fundamental properties of the universe, life and intelligence. So there's a symmetry between this sounds, I know it sounds implausible, but taking into account the latest cutting edge knowledge in neuroscience and genomics, I can show a fundamental symmetry, an invariance, a sameness, if you like, between a neuron and a gene and its gene regulatory mechanisms. A fundamental symmetry between neuronal networks and gene regulatory networks, a fundamental symmetry between a genome and the brain, ontogenesis, thought and behavior, evolution, learning, and creativity. So that's what the theories become. And so this is very exciting. And I think this is really what you need. Okay, the implication of this theory, I mean, implication of equal sense is nuclear power, it's nuclear weapons, is basically the idea that you can take energy and form matter. The implication of this theory is true artificial intelligence.
Yeah, interesting. So, so how does the fractal brain theory lead to a theory of reality? And do you call it that, a fractal theory of reality, or something like that? Because you go further in your
yes, I mean,
in your theory.
I mean, the really powerful idea, it goes further. It's not just a unified theory of life and intelligence. It goes far, far further, because this unified theory of brain, genome, life, intelligence, symmetry extrapolates from a physical biological organism, extrapolates to the universe. Now, this notion of the universe as a giant brain, the universe as a giant organism, I know it's the stuff of sci-fi, but it's actually what many scientists think anyway. That like Freeman Dyson imagines that the universe is one overarching intelligence, like a giant brain that somehow passeth all understanding. It's an old idea. It's the idea of a universal Vishnu, a cosmic Christ, a kind of a celestial Buddha, that the entire universe becomes this single organism. And it's also the idea of microcosm as macrocosm. Once you have a completely symmetrical fractal theory of body and brain, that perfectly extrapolates to this notion of the universe as a body and brain. Did you get it? And the idea that what scientists are finding already is these fractal structures that in the universe. So it's a simple extrapolation from this theory into the universe, and I think it presents a very compelling picture of cosmology once you understand that life and intelligence are such fundamental aspects of existence. And the way this theory is framed in terms of symmetry and what's called discrete mathematics, it really is fundamental. Then it gives a kind of more power to the idea that somehow life and intelligence really is fundamental to the universe. And then this extrapolation of the theory to the universe is something many people have been kind of like expecting anyway.
Yeah, I think people might be familiar with, often on social media, you'll see the comparing of, say, a neuron and the structure of the universe. And so you can show similarity between neurons and the higher structure of the universe, the Laniakea
right.
structure. Our local domain in the universe. And so you're saying that we can look at those images, and there's more than just a kind of metaphorical way to interpret that. It's like that's pointing us to something that's very real, and it goes beyond just matter, as it were. It goes beyond space and time into something more fundamental.
Yes, completely. I mean, the notion that somehow the planet Earth, Gaia, will become intelligent, will become conscious, and that galaxies, as life extends out into galaxies, that becomes integrated into a unit that becomes like an organism and becomes conscious, etc. So it's kind of like a kind of concentric, nested Russian dolls model of the universe, with all these kind of like intermediate stages. With this fractal theory of the brain, with a fractal universe, it becomes organized into kind of recursively nested conscious entities. And in terms of the entire universe, it really gives a kind of overarching structure for the universe. No, these simulations of the universe that provide these kind of neuron-like structures. It sounds kind of superficial, but other papers show that the dynamics happening across kind of like vast universal scales actually like have parallels to like dynamics of neuronal interactions, and also the dynamics of kind of say internets and local area networks. So the idea that then this process of body, brain, mind extrapolates to the universe, it's kind of like a lot of research is converging to that area anyway. What this theory gives is a kind of overarching kind of, I guess, way of grouping all these separate ideas together into some unified whole, I believe.
Mm. Yeah. So let's stay on that for a second. The idea of like you say, the idea of the Gaia or the Earth becoming conscious,
right,
or the galaxy, or larger structures, the universe in itself.
Yeah.
How literally can we take that? I mean, I forget the scientist, but who proposed the noosphere, which is, you know, the idea that human thought, consciousness, interactions, you know, the buzzing of information around the world is going to be is a type of consciousness in itself. So how do you think that's kind of more figurative, or do you think we can sort of take that idea very literally at varying scales?
I think the person you talk about, Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, I think he was.
Thank you. Yeah.
I think he was a Jesuit priest, wasn't he? So he did see it in kind of like in kind of religious terms, and he also introduced this idea of cosmic Christ. So I guess there's really no difference between his ideas of a noosphere and ideas of Hegel, really, the philosopher. You know, Hegel has a bad reputation because people think his ideas lead to totalitarianism, which isn't necessarily the case, and often his ideas mistranslated. So one mistranslation is Hegel is believed to have said that the state is the embodiment of God. Okay, no, it's something more subtle. He kind of said that because there is a God, it implies that there will be a state. It's something like that. You know, these are old ideas of somehow that society is the body of Christ. That's in the Bible. The idea that a society has a kind of zeitgeist, has a kind of like a kind of spirit to it. And then if you think about the world society as a global village, and that's a very conflict-ridden global village, what's happening in the world right now. But the idea that Gaia noosphere is a recurring idea. It's not just Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, it's Hegel, it's the Bible. It's really a recurring idea. When Pierre Teilhard de Chardin talks about the cosmic Christ, he's talking about the same thing. He's talking about the entire universe becomes this one single entity that's conscious. So I think consciousness is not really constrained to our physical brains. And I think, you know, this idea of organizational invariance from philosophy, that we can suppose that I can suppose you are conscious because my brain is like yours, you behave like me. So I can suppose that your consciousness is like mine. Now, if we have a fractal theory of the brain that extrapolates to the planet, extrapolates to the universe, then we have something called, I call scale invariant, organizational invariance. If then the planet is organized in the same way that my brain is organized, I can then also infer, if it's conscious, that consciousness is like my consciousness. But if the fractal brain extrapolates to the entire universe as also a fractal brain, then that allows me also to think that consciousness is of the same kind as mine. So it leads to many exciting ideas that you know, the scale invariant organizational invariance.
It does. So I love entertaining, you know, various theories of everything, almost as a spiritual practice in itself. So what level of confidence do you have that this theory is or could be an accurate reflection of reality?
Well, what gives me confidence in this theory is, but really the idea that it's really application of the simple idea of symmetry to understanding the brains and genomes. So what the clever thing about the theory, it finds a way to apply the idea of symmetry to the brain and genome. Now, in terms of confidence, it's really the comprehensiveness, its ability to explain. And also, I guess, beauty, the fact that you capture all this complexity in a single kind of concept. The idea that I can use the same theory to understand the workings of a neuron and use the same conception to then understand the workings of an entire person. So his ability to unify vast amounts of data from psychology and cognitive science, i.e. functioning of the entire organism, entire mind, and then map that to the functioning, perfectly map it to the functioning of the most important neuron in the brain, which is the cortical pyramidal cell, and I find a correspondence from an entire person to the function of a neuron. And then that same concept, that same symmetry can then also extrapolate to the understanding of gene and gene regulatory networks. So it's really the power, its comprehensiveness and its explanatory power. But what's really going to seal the deal in terms of pushing this theory into the mainstream is its ability to unify existing ideas in artificial intelligence. So this is practical applications in the world of artificial intelligence, but also in computer science generally. So in terms of practical application, in terms of the ultimate, I think this theory has a fast track to becoming accepted. It's really hard to get new scientific ideas accepted. Okay, it takes, often, basically people come up with these ideas and it's accepted after they die. Now, I don't have that luxury because I need to basically get this idea accepted to use it as a platform to promote the spiritual religious message and the political ideas. So I need to get things done in the next 5-10 years at the most. The fast track for this theory becoming accepted is the creation of true AI. And the reason why I'm so confident is its ability to totally capture these really powerful algorithms that are already out there. Obviously, like things like evolutionary learning, reinforcement learning, but also the really clever thing is that, okay, I'll say something really kind of quite that people can totally understand in terms of technology. Okay, it kind of compactifies what I'm trying to explain. Now Google, the corporation, it runs on a small set of fundamental computer technologies. Okay, there's a search engine involved. Okay, there's a search engine and it works in a particular way. There's relational databases and it works in a certain way. There is data compression. All that YouTube video, all that stuff is data compressed. Okay, and then there's artificial intelligence, machine learning. What I think, and this is a real technological marvel, and the reason why I have confidence that this theory is right in terms of, because it's a theory of the brain, has to basically process information, is that this theory essentially unifies all those separate technologies that runs Google: data compression, artificial intelligence, machine learning, relational databases, and the search engine aspect into one succinct, compact theory and one algorithm. So that's many other reasons why, but I think it's explanatory power, but its ability to basically function as a technology of utility.
Yeah. And so yeah, mentioning explanatory power, you talk about the way it can unify ideas about the brain, the genome, technology. I know that you've also spoken about where it can say something about physics. Now, if I can go off piece to second here.
Okay.
So a test for a theory of everything can be its explanatory power in terms of explaining the paradoxes in physics, or the questions that we have in physics. So that we've got the wave particle duality, we've got things like entanglement that defy a materialist or physicalist explanation. So how does your system sort of tackle those kind of questions?
I think really what's missing in physics and what can really sew things up, and even someone like Roger Penrose has suggested it, that really the answer for really unpacking or really unraveling the really deep mysteries in physics, he said it would come from life science. Okay, now he might have had microtubules in mind, because he's with his pal Stuart Hameroff, they're quite into microtubules. He might have had that in mind. I think it's far deeper, because I think basically once you have an understanding of life and intelligence and frame it in terms of this kind of really deep theory that's really kind of based on certain fundamental mathematical concepts, then it introduces into the world of physics. It establishes basically life and intelligence as really being fundamental. So obviously, the questions of the anthropic principle are answered basically because it's not, that just this universe happens to be satisfactory for life, just because it wouldn't be the case there's people analyzing the universe if there's no life, because it basically says that life is absolutely fundamental. It's fundamental to the fabric of the universe. But once you have that in place, then I think it solves loads of conundrums. Like they're in string theory, kind of string theory has what's derived from it is this idea that the cosmological constants are so exquisitely arranged. It's basically there is the number of possible universes with different cosmological constants. Okay, the number is beyond staggering. It's beyond cosmological. It's beyond astronomical. It's 10 to the 500. 10 with 500 noughts following it. Now, what this life intelligence theory solves is basically, look, it's not all these different universes that don't exist. What exists is what's fundamental for enabling this central life intelligence aspect to exist. So instead of saying, there's all these different universes, 10 to the 500, what you're supposing is basically that there is this, there is life and intelligence, and then we select a tiny subset of those universes to be actually real. Now, in terms of, wave particle duality and stuff, I mean, collapse of the wave function. I mean, what I think is correct and right is basically that there is this idea called time symmetric quantum mechanics. It comes from a physicist called Yakir Aharonov. Now, he was nominated for the Nobel Prize in Physics in 2009, I think. He didn't win, but he won the 2010 US presidential medal for physics. That's quite prestigious as well. Now, his idea basically, so this is very mainstream physics now, and several prominent physicists have taken up his cause. Time symmetric quantum mechanics is basically this idea that there's a destiny wave function that comes from the future, emanates backwards in time. And that basically, it kind of like it directs the collapse of the wave function going forwards in time. Do you see? It's teleological. What I think is the case is that basically, that this destiny wave function further kind of like then it kind of like subsidizes or it selects even further a tiny subset of possible universes. Because I think the real what is real and what is existent are those universes which basically support life and intelligence. But I think that the real the even smaller subset of that number of universes are those universes which converge to this cosmic Christ or universal Vishnu or celestial Buddha. You see, it's a tiny subset, and from that cosmic Christ, this kind of destiny wave function emanates backwards in time to create the universe. So I think in terms of solving the problems in physics, because this brain theory of life and intelligence, fractal brain theory of life and intelligence, extrapolates to the universe, then there's a perfect mapping from the teleology of the brain in our lives. Where do we have meaning and purpose in what we understand is in our brains, isn't it? But we have a fractal theory of the brain and mind where there is purpose and meaning, and if that extrapolates to the universe, then basically it shows there is purpose and meaning in the universe, which then basically maps to this backward emanation destiny wave function thing. So I think there is a perfect extrapolation from this fractal brain theory to the universe. And I think what's missing in physics and cosmology now, there are all these separate theories, hundreds and hundreds of different theories. What's lacking is an overall picture, a compelling picture to take all these pieces of the jigsaw puzzle and form it into a composite picture, which is utterly compelling. Now, what I believe is that this fractal brain life equals intelligence symmetry theory is so fundamental. It will provide the grounding in order to slot all these different theories from physics and cosmology into something that's far more powerful than all these what these separate theories can achieve. So that's what I believe. So I think it's not just answers one or two questions. I think it's really the framework for fitting together all the separate physical theories.
Yeah, and you can see in mainstream science, we see people like Max Tegmark, Michio Kaku, Roger Penrose, as you mentioned, and lesser known people like Donald Hoffman and Nima Arkani Hamed exploring these ideas of mathematics being fundamental to reality and consciousness. So are there any other researchers who are on a similar track to you who you would consider to be your academic allies or contemporaries? Like, who else is going for this that you're aware of?
Do you know? I think Roger Penrose. I think he has a kind of hidden agenda, because I think he wrote his book, Emperor's New Mind, which I read it avidly a month after it came out back in, I think, 1989 or something.
Right.
I think he has a hidden agenda. I think he really is trying to re-establish kind of, I guess, I don't want to use the word spiritual, but he's trying to basically trying to establish with his reputation and through his work, it's something that human consciousness and human beings don't just reduce to basic physics. I think he has maybe a quasi spiritual beliefs motivating him. Maybe that's his Quaker background or whatever. But I think there are, like, historically, people like Schrödinger fully was into Advaita Vedanta, in his life, in his book, What is Life? So I think historically it's always been the case. I think in the world, if people are pursuing this direction in academia, then they'll often keep very quiet about it, because they don't want to damage careers. So I think there are people who are converging on the same track. I mean, say Max Tegmark is promoting this idea of a mathematical universe, and he's basically reiterating Pythagoras. So there are these kind of, more generally speaking, what I believe is that there are many physicists who are basically coming up with ideas which have parallels to religion and spiritual cosmology, you might say. They might not themselves believe in religion or spirituality, but they exist as parallels. So another mystical idea which Roger Penrose believes in is cyclical universes. Now, there are other researchers promoting the idea of cyclical universes. This is straight, classical Hinduism and some schools of mystical Islam. What I believe is that many of these researchers who are producing these parallels in physics, cosmology to religion, spirituality, they may or may not be aware of it. If they are having kind of agendas which are quasi-spiritual, then they have to keep quiet about it. But it doesn't matter. My agenda is basically trying to communicate these religious ideas. What I can do is take all their work, these fragments which have parallels to religious spiritual cosmology. And what I've been able to do just actually quite recently in the past 5 years is take all these fragments together and form a composite picture of the universe and cosmology, which is identical to the kind of cosmology of the so-called hidden esoteric religion, or the kind of perennial wisdom, or so-called Prisca Theologia. So in terms of allies, maybe in the future, more will come out of the woodwork as this kind of thing becomes more accessible and open. But right now, I think there are many people who are maybe young researchers who are basically really are looking for something, more kind of like more encompassing, I suppose. But in terms of mainstream kind of physicists and cosmologists, if they are having these views, then I think they keep quiet about it, quite frankly. That's what I think.
Yeah. So
I'll tell you a funny story. I'll tell you a funny story. I met Roger Penrose, and because I was sponsored to go to the Tucson Consciousness Conference 20th anniversary in 2014. And the organizer thought I was Korean TV crew. Okay. Anyway, cut a long story short, before the meeting started, I actually sat down to dinner with Roger Penrose and Stuart Hameroff. Okay, it's a fluke. It's just basically, oh, you're not Korean TV crew, but you're still important. I'm going to just tell you to bugger off. Okay. Because of that, I managed to sit down, before the conference, and I managed to really talk to Roger Penrose and his wife, Goshri. I said his wife is very much younger than him. I mean, I said, I said to his wife, are you a consciousness researcher? Gee whiz. And she said, oh, I'm Roger's wife. And I was like, oh, put my foot in it, silly me. Anyway, silly guy. But anyway, cut long story short, I think that from discussions with Hameroff and Penrose, with Hameroff, I kind of like said, what's your interest in consciousness? He kind of like said, yeah, but it's back in the 60s, 70s. And I kind of said, psychedelic drugs, was psychedelic drugs involved and stuff? And, and then kind of like, do you have a kind of spiritual angle? And his reaction was kind of like, almost like,
right.
As in, yeah. So I'm not, I might have misread, and he might see this interview and saying, you totally got the wrong idea. But I got the impression that basically there was a understanding that he didn't want to kind of make open, and the fact that he's hanging out with Deepak Chopra, who's closely aligned with his conference suggests to me, again, that's a potential ally who, even in an intimate dinner before conference, had to kind of keep quiet about it.
Yeah.
Okay, that's another kind of like just a little side story there.
No, great. So that really speaks to the sort of allergy of, modernist thinkers and scientific rationalists who really are averse to the whole, and anything that mentions like Deepak or consciousness and stuff like that. There's this divide in the scientific and research community where some people accept that that's something that we need to look at. Like Rupert Sheldrake is another example of someone who is willing to put his neck out and be out there saying, in a true scientific, what I would call true scientific way, suggesting that there are questions that we can tackle without this sort of stigma of woo, and
well, totally. I mean, you've got to understand that Oliver is someone who, with the prestige of Erwin Schrödinger, who's basically the father of one of the fathers of quantum mechanics. His Schrödinger wave equations, I mean, are the basis of quantum mechanics. A lot of Heisenberg's matrix methods. I mean, in his book, What is Life? He actually says what he believes. He actually says things like, Deus factus sum, I've become God. He kind of like talks about the Atman Brahman formulation in Bhagavad Gita. So this is what he fully believes. Basically, essentially mystical ideas of oneness with the universe, oneness with God. But then, even someone of his stature, his book, What is Life, even though James Watson and Francis Crick read it and were hugely influenced by it, and they actually wrote to him after they got their Nobel Prizes saying, your book really influenced us. Because what he wrote in the epilogue, okay, he wrote his essentially religious beliefs. That book is almost like anathema. It's like banned. It's almost like censored from the kind of like, you know what I'm saying, the modern discourse in physics and life science.
Yeah.
So waiting really for a paradigm shift, really. I mean, waiting for this kind of great revolution to happen in the world of science, and I think it's due time. I think, yeah.
Yeah, it's strange, isn't it? How those early quantum physicists kind of they all alluded to some greater narrative or conception of reality involving not necessarily a Christian God, but some intelligence or something underlying that we just we could infer but not prove. I'll tell you a story. I met just randomly on the train quite recently a student who is studying physics and philosophy as a combination at university, and basically I sat next to them because I saw that they had a quantum physics book on the table. I was like, wow, I've got to talk to this person. And so we got talking, and I was asking her all these kind of big questions, and so it's relatively rare, I think, for someone to combine those two subjects. There's not, they're in two different departments in the university, and obviously they can contradict one another, philosophy and physics. It was interesting that she said at some point, in studying like Schrodinger's equation and being exquisitely aware of the fine-tuned, fine balanced nature of the laws of physics, that she was surprised that she had begun to think that there was something not non-traditionally physical about origins and about reality, and that kind of shocked her to get that realization when going into physics. Right. So yeah, it's kind of like, yeah, it's strange how it seems like historically we've already been there. These thinkers have already been there, and now we're having to almost go through the same realization, but maybe on a more layman level. It's got to permeate society at a deeper level, perhaps.
I think the originators were of quantum mechanics. I mean, with all due respect to leading lights of physics today. I think they're just on another level to the kind of like people we have today. They're just on a kind of like a, I mean, there are very clever guys working in the field today, but in terms of the founders, they were just basically like geniuses, yeah. So almost without exception, they kind of like they saw the parallels between what they were studying, their physics, and Taoism, Eastern philosophy, Hermetic Christianity, call it what you will. Pauli worked with Carl Gustav Jung on his theory of synchronicity and non-causal physics. What I think what happened is that basically there's been a trend towards atheism since the mid-19th century. And I think the German-speaking world, they kind of hung on to its kind of religion and spirituality a bit longer than maybe other parts of the world. And the idealist view made the mainly German-speaking founders of quantum mechanics maybe more open to a kind of like spiritual interpretation. But I think the juggernaut of atheism has kind of progressed through the 20th century, and I think just became embedded in academic departments. I think things go in cycles, and I think basically things return. So I think there is a kind of like a hunger and also kind of like a search for deeper answers, I suppose, that are not just about paying your bills and making a career in physics and winning a Nobel Prize. I think maybe there's a kind of return to a search for deeper integration of these ideas with things like philosophy and even religion. I think that's what's happening today.
Yeah, certainly coming to the fore with discussions around the term that the meaning crisis and all those guys, John Vervaeke, etc. So to get back on a little bit with the mainstream physics theories,
okay,
you've referred to how the two most explanatory contending theories in physics, string theory and loop quantum gravity, both suggest this big bounce universe, this teleological expanding and shrinking universe, cyclical. It was my understanding that string theory suggests the many world hypothesis, which is why I struggle to take it seriously fully. So does that contradict what you're saying about it supporting the cyclical big bounce, or is that confluent with it?
From my understanding, reading papers in the field of loop quantum gravity and string theory, what they are actually saying, what they're saying is there is a kind of pre-Big Bang epoch. Okay, so before the Big Bang happened, there's a pre-Big Bang epoch to the universe. Something existed. Yeah. It's not something from nothing. Now, what they're both saying is that basically the pre-Big Bang epoch is a perfect mirror image of this universe in this epoch. That's what they're both saying. Now, some theorists take it further and merge it with the Big Bang theory. So some theorists do it kind of differently. So I know Sean Carroll, I think working with Alan Guth, they have a kind of Janus face theory of the universe, which is just basically from the Big Bang, it diverges in both directions. But some people take it further and they'll say basically, yes, this is a pre-Big Bang epoch. That's the time before the Big Bang. Now, the thing about and some people take it further and then merge it with the ideas of a cyclical universe. But what loop quantum gravity, string theory are saying explicitly, both of them saying in their formulations is a pre-Big Bang epoch. That's a mirror image. Now, for our purposes in terms of talking about teleology and using that for political ends and having a kind of like extrapolating a life intelligence fractal brain theory to the universe, for my purposes, I mean, what's interesting is that this idea of teleology and this idea of a pre-Big Bang epoch being a mirror image. Now, this is a fundamental result, absolutely fundamental. No one would contest this is absolutely fundamental. It's called CPT symmetry. And if you take it out of the, modern physics, then most modern physics collapses apparently. So Nobel Prizes duly handed out. It's a fundamental concept to the universe. What CPT symmetry states is basically that there is charge, there's polarity, and there's time, and they're intertwined. If you flip one of those, kind of like aspects, you have to flip the other two. It's called CPT symmetry. Now, the fact that the pre-Big Bang epoch is a mirror image, that's polarity. You're flipping the polarity, which means you also have to flip time and charge. That's what it means. So it means that the pre-Big Bang epoch, the arrow of time goes the other way. No, this is really interesting because it means, but if it's the big bounce, it means that basically there's a time inversion. It means that basically it's a big bounce, but we're bouncing back in time. It's strange, isn't it? So instead of the Big Bang being the beginning, it's a point of inflection, which means everything that's going to happen in the future has already happened because it's happened in terms of like a photographic negative. You know, charge is inverted, so matter is antimatter. Antimatter is matter. It's like a photographic negative, but a photographic negative contains all the information to make the photograph, which means the pre-Big Bang epoch, like the photographic negative, contains all the information for creating this epoch. Do you see? So it's completely teleological. And it basically says that, you know, the entire universe is ahead of us, has already happened, but in a kind of mirror image. So it's teleological, and it's also like written like a book. So yeah, it's like, I guess it's Bhagavad Gita. This is the Bible. This is the Quran. So this is another convergence with religion.
Yeah. Is there any way we would be aware of the fact whether we're going forwards or backwards?
Well, I mean, all the laws in physics are time reversible. Quantum mechanics, general relativity, they're all time reversible. I mean, what we have is this thing called entropy. So from the Big Bang, there's, you know, increase in entropy, but then increase in complexity. I guess in the counterclock phase, even though it's like, you know, inversion in time, it's like a inversion of what's happening now. So we go from, in the counterclock phase, you know, the pre-Big Bang, you go from, you know, totality, total complexity, into this kind of dissolution, into chaos, and then, you know, it gets sucked into this low entropy Big Bang point, and then it explodes again. It goes back to complexity.
Yeah.
Does it make sense?
It does, yeah. And I've thought about this in terms of well. So I'll ask the question. So if the universe is repeatedly bouncing and mirroring itself to and from this Big Bang or Omega point, you might call it. Are you saying it's literally a negative copy with the exact same events recurring in reverse, or is it repeating the sort of overarching trend with unique events that ends up at the same unified state?
I mean, what the physicists are saying, what they're saying, the loop quantum gravitists and the kind of superstring theorists are saying is basically the pre-Big Bang epoch is an exact mirror image of this one, so it contains all the information. What I would say is basically, unlike Nietzsche's eternal return of the same thing, what I think is that basically, you know, in reality, in real physics, there's no perfect periodic attractors. There's basically chaos attractors. Yeah, they basically never repeat. So what I think is the case is that okay, once we arrive at the back to the omega point, which is actually the alpha point, then we have a new creation in a sense, and it's like another loop on the chaos attractor, but it's not repeating this exactly the same trajectory. So it's like infinite variations on the same theme. Does that make sense? And then so you create a new epoch, and basically the new epoch is like a new kind of counterclock kind of dissolution of Godhead or whatever, or celestial Buddha, cosmic Christ. And there's a new dissolution, a new pattern of dissolution. And there's in the next cycle of the universe, then basically there's a re-evolution, a new Big Bang, and then things play out, but it's not exactly the same. At the same time, this cosmic template, it gives, because we have a fractal theory of the universe, that's a body and brain, that's an intelligence. Then this fractal template is actually being played out in our lives. So in a sense, every life is also a variation on that same theme, but on a microcosmic scale.
So what does this mean for the free will versus determinism dialectic? I'm not sure I've heard you talk about that a lot.
I think free will is one of those questions which is something of a like a word game, really, because I think if you say free will, is this person free by considering this person isolated from society, isolated from the rest of the universe, then in a sense that person is free, because you're basically saying this person, or that a person being tried in court, I mean, that person might say society's to blame. I'm in this court now because what's happened in my life and society, what's happened ultimately in the universe, you know, interdependent arising, in the sense that the defendant is correct, but you can't put, you know, society and the universe on trial every time someone goes to court. So I think in terms of like practical considerations, then we have to think in terms of an individual in isolation of considering society and the universe as being free. But then from another perspective of, kind of block universe, kind of, I guess, cosmological perspective, then we are in a sense like insects frozen in amber. There's absolutely no freedom. But in terms of our day-to-day lives, because we don't have perfect knowledge, we don't have perfect knowledge of what's going to happen in the future, then for all intents and purposes, considering ourselves as individuals separate from the universe and society, then in a sense we are free. But it's you see, it's circular, it's self-defining, isn't it?
Yeah, and I've arrived at that sort of dual perspective before, and some part of me thinks that it's not quite satisfactory. Like it's if we're going to have this sort of new understanding of reality, then there needs to be some implications for that. Maybe it should affect our ethics and morals and legal systems to some degree. I struggle with holding those two, and I wonder if there's like a synthesis position.
Well, I think what's missing today is that I think talking about atheism, the rise of atheism in the 19th century, is that basically certain cosmological metaphysical assumptions were abandoned, and these were related to this kind of religion, which is really derived from what emerged during the Renaissance. They called it the Prisca Theologia. And there's a certain model of the universe which was purposeful, which was microcosm as macrocosm, and this idea of cosmology and metaphysics really influenced the kind of the Renaissance, but also the Enlightenment. But the ideas of progress really came from this kind of metaphysical cosmological understanding, and ideas of like human rights and human dignity really came from this cosmological metaphysical understanding. So I think these ideas really lead to a kind of like, if you can reestablish these kind of metaphysical cosmological ideas, which really are the same ideas from the Renaissance and Enlightenment, which really gave rise to the modern world, then I think you can really solve this kind of conundrum that many liberals and left wing have, that they've kind of forgotten their roots, that the roots of modern society really from the Renaissance and Enlightenment. The Enlightenment project happily chopped away the roots of religion. That's what happened. Okay, so happily, but many commentators and thinkers don't understand that those Enlightenment thinkers, they weren't atheists. They believe in a certain hidden religion. You might call it esoteric. It's called the Prisca Theologia, as was said. In the process of chopping away the roots of religion, the process also chopped away those very roots of the Enlightenment project itself that gave rise to these notions of equality, liberty, fraternity, progress, equal dignity, etc. So I think that's the problem today. And I think the wider implication of what we just talked about, say, even the idea of teleological universe that has a kind of set conclusion, has built in it this idea of progression towards some kind of perfect future state. So I guess by reviving these kind of ideas, which do kind of clash with ideas of me being free and determining the future, there's a kind of like, I guess, a silver lining that also you give people a kind of like a model of the universe and world history that has this kind of eschatological hope that things will work out in the end. So I think it's a two-edged sword, I think.
Yeah, I think you've largely answered the next question, which is, but maybe we can just sort of open it up a little bit. So,
yeah.
So what's the connection with religion, myth, and mysticism? So you talk about how esoteric ideas influenced the Enlightenment, but that it somehow got lost as the West embraced empirical science. And some or arguably most Western people would call that progress, this move towards empiricism. So, but why is that not necessarily the case?
Well, I think absolutely there's been progress in technology that cannot be denied. I mean, I have all these amazing technologies. Modern living standards through technology has been incredible. Modern healthcare, but there's a dark side. I think what happened was that say William Blake, who I'm a great fan of, I think he warned of the dark satanic mills, and that's before the Industrial Revolution just started. So the kind of upshot of this technological progress, is essentially the modern industrial world. And it really started off, in the kind of late 18th century. And William Blake was warning of these dark satanic mills, but obviously the satanic mills got far, far darker. Now, William Blake was a romantic, and I think the romantics in England and also Germany, they're essentially mystics, and there's a far heavily more mystical aspect in German idealism than English idealism. But William Blake really was uber mystic. He thought himself as a prophet. So I think what the romantics were about was, yes, that they were clinging on to this religion of the Renaissance that organizations like the Freemasons and Christians fully believe in anyway. But I guess what they were warning of was that something was precious was being lost. And I think the dark satanic mills got far darker. And what was lost was that religion, which really gave the kind of values which are missing in the world today. So I think, the idea that capitalism went wild, that the industrial kind of process just has gone awry, and now it's destroying the planet. So I think what went out with what William Blake was warning and the romantics were warning was basically a baby is being thrown out with the bathwater. And that baby is essentially the cosmological metaphysical assumptions of their religion, which really underpinned the values of the Renaissance and Enlightenment. So I think we're living in a world today where we have this amazing technology, but those values have gone. And with the modern period, the rise of Marxism, Nazism, all these neoliberalisms and all these isms of the world, I think basically they have gone astray because they kind of lost those core values which really enable civilization. I mean, that sounds really highfalutin, doesn't it? We're talking about the values which really kind of basically enabled the Renaissance, enabled the Enlightenment. It enabled the progress. The start of science was essentially it was a Freemason meeting group, the Royal Society. It was basically the Invisible College was a Freemason meeting group. Francis Bacon was totally into this Prisca Theologia. Or basically, there was a hidden religion. It gave rise to science, and the science gave rise to the modern technological world, and it gave rise to these values: equality, liberty, fraternity, universal brotherhood, human dignity, sanctity of human life. But when you take away the cosmological metaphysical assumptions, then you see what's taken its place is Ayn Rand's absolute selfishness. It is Marxism, Nazism, neoliberalism. Basically, the spirit has gone. And I think basically this is what the romantics were warning. And once you realize that the baby has been thrown out of the bathwater, then you understand why we have a crisis of meaning, and why, all the kind of like morals and ethics of the world have gone astray. And once you realize the baby has been thrown out of the bathwater, what do? You have to get the baby back.
Yeah, just want to pause on that. Those names you mentioned. So Ayn Rand, the kind of godmother of greed is good philosophy. So I find it easier to see how you can notice the absence of an ethical framework in that ideology. But leftists might argue that embedded in Marx is, much more of a communitarian, golden rule kind of ethic. But obviously then, I know there's a lot of controversy about whether it was Marx's ideas that led to, the atrocities of the 20th century. But do you think do you think if Marx had been operating from a more grounded metaphysical route, that that would have put us in better stead in the 20th century?
Well, absolutely. I think one thing I'll say about Ayn Rand is basically her objectivism is actually given the current metaphysical cosmological assumptions, purposeless universe, materialism, selfish genes, her philosophy makes absolute sense. So I'll give that to Ayn Rand. She's saying, let's be objective about things, and she's not incorrect.
She's consistent.
She's consistent, and the fact of the matter is, I mean, but the problem is, people might say we like our Ayn Rand. Richard Dawkins thinks that selfish genes is really bad for organizing society and living our life. Okay, this is a passionate anti-Darwinist when it comes to using the ideas of Darwin and selfish genes in terms of living our lives.
Yeah, let's repeat that. Richard Dawkins says he's a passionate anti-Darwinist.
Did you know, in my talks, I repeat that because people think they've misheard me. No, he said at the Oxford Union, he said he was interviewed by I can't remember his name. It's the I keep forgetting. He's interviewed. This is Oxford Union interview. he's a passionate anti-Darwinist when it comes to living our lives, organizing our society. He actually, advocates that the morals of the Church of England is actually not too bad. So it's basically, there's a kind of conflict in his mind. Okay, now the problem is, people might say Ayn Rand. We like our Ayn Rand. We like our selfishness. We like our Thatcherism, because Richard Dawkins joked that selfish genes leads to a Thatcherite world. Well, what people don't understand, and what Richard Dawkins didn't say in that interview, was basically he didn't say that basically it doesn't just lead to a selfish world, it leads to a genocidal world. Because if you truly take the ideas of selfish genes and apply it to society and living our lives, it leads to genocidal political ideology. And this is not hypothetical, is it? Because we know the first wave of Darwinism, social Darwinism, eugenics, it led to Nazi ideology. So this is not hypothetical. So there's an implication and to the modern worldview, and it's not just Ayn Rand. It's basically what happened in Germany during the Weimar Republic.
Yeah.
Sorry, back to Marx. I mean, the thing about Karl Marx, yes, he lost his religion in the both he and Engels actually wrote to each other saying that actually Ludwig Feuerbach's book, which was a polemic against Christian religion, they both read it, and they wrote about how they lost their fixation on Hegel, on his spiritual ideas. They also wrote to each other weeks after Darwin's Origin of Species was published, and they again congratulated themselves on how in accord they were with his ideas. And what I say about Marxism basically is that, okay, look, someone who's studied Marxism far more than I have done is John Maynard Keynes, the great economist. Okay, absolute genius, a very clever guy. Okay. And basically, he called, there's a problem with, you take away God. He basically had this problem, and you take away God and these ideas of this kind of hidden religion, these ideas of the God within, or we're made in the image of God, that there's a cosmic image, somehow we're of that image. His analysis was basically that inevitably what led to was utilitarianism. Okay, Jeremy Bentham, etc. At UCL, his body used to be in University College just down the road from where I am now. Jeremy Bentham's utilitarianism. Now, John Maynard Keynes called Marxism utilitarianism reductio ad absurdum. He's saying basically, essentially, you take away the religion, you have basically utilitarianism. Now, in the current times, Sam Harris's militant atheists, ethical moral system based on the current worldview, what is it? Utilitarianism. Now, what's wrong with utilitarianism? Okay, there are lots of problems with utilitarianism. Okay, so but I'm saying that's the best answer. That when you take away the kind of like I guess spiritual aspect to kind of economics and political philosophy, that's what you end up with.
Can you just go into that for the sake of me and the audience? So the problem with utilitarianism.
It's basically, the greatest good for the greatest number. I mean, what it kind of like the conundrum is basically, do we, for the satisfaction of the greater good, do we kill someone for their entertainment, or do we exterminate a minority because the greater good feels it's better for them? So I guess what it misses is kind of like the idea of absolute human dignity. That's what's missing basically. So when you talk about a numbers game, in terms of like a statistical measure of maximum utility for the maximum number, then it doesn't really deal with things like exterminating minorities, because it satisfies the greater number, you maximize the utility. There's also things, what is the greatest satisfaction of the maximum? How do you measure happiness and stuff? So there are problems with it. And I think basically once you take away these ideas of the absolute sanctity of human life, then I think basically you do end up inevitably with utilitarian theories, like Marxism, which have their problems by sacrificing the kind of sanctity of the lives of a minority for the satisfaction of the greater majority. That's one of the problems.
Yeah. So just to clarify for the audience, do you ascribe to any particular existing religion?
Well, I think my view is basically, I know this is a very controversial thing, but my view is basically all religion fundamentally is the same. I can't include every single dodgy cult or every single small kind of like grouping that's emerged, but in terms of major world religion, there's an essential core truth, and that's a universal truth. There's a kind of esoteric core to all world religions. This can be called Prisca Theologia, or perennial wisdom. And this is where you have the same set of beliefs. So I guess you might say I'm universalist. But I'm really about kind of showing basically that there really is this core truth, and then re-establishing that core truth through science, and then kind of presenting it into the 20th century, because I think it has massive political implications, which we kind of skimmed over in this interview. I think if you want to give my religion or what I believe in a name, then it's really you might call it Prisca Theologia. It's essentially what the the Renaissance men really believed in, or perennial wisdom. So that is essentially my religion. But I think what I'm about is trying to fully express this religion, not in terms of parables or, I reference the Bible, I reference Corpus Mescum, Quran, etc., in terms of communicating the core ideas of this core truth of religion. But I think what I'm really about is to try and completely explain it using purely scientific, mathematical, and philosophic concepts, and have its own grounding in pure reason, while at the same time referencing the kind of traditions of the world. So that's what I'm about, really. That's my religion, I suppose.
Yeah. So yeah, just to pause on that. So you've said all religions have this common feature that might be called the Gnostic experience, or this unifying truth, or the knowing the truth of God. But I've heard some pushback from that idea from more like physicalist friends. Who say that it's too simplistic to make these kind of sweeping connections, and it ignores the very real differences between, say, the practices and beliefs of Christianity, Hinduism, Islam, etc., and it could even be offensive to those groups. So how is that a potential, and how do you respond to that?
I think what most people don't understand is that religion is a very complex thing. Obviously there's many differences in religious belief. What most people don't understand, even people who have done degrees, even doctorates, even professors of theology or comparative religion, they don't understand that religion exists on two levels. There's basically what's called outer mysteries, the outer skins of the onion, and there's what's called esoteric or inner mysteries. All religion has this. So in Judaism, we have the hidden teachings of Moses, divulged only to Joshua, his successor. We have the hidden teachings of Buddha, only given to Ananda. We have the so-called Batin of Islam, only divulged in full to Ali, his son-in-law and cousin. And Jesus saying in the Bible, revealed only to his disciples, I reveal to you, only to you, the mysteries of the kingdom. To everyone else, the mystery is spoken of in parables, so that they are ever seeing but never perceiving, ever hearing but never understanding. But that is the situation with most people who talk about religion. Basically, I've worked in religion for 10 years. I know all kinds of people, all different sects, cults, religions. And what it is basically the truth of the central core esoteric religion, hidden teachings of Moses, Kabbalah, the Vajrayana Buddhism, the kind of Sufi Shia sects of Islam, etc., esoteric Christianity, the kind of Tantric, Advaita, Vedanta traditions. What you have is basically a core set of beliefs which are absolutely identical. Now, the critic might even say that even in these esoteric traditions, there are differences. But then you've got to understand the history of religion is basically facts get changed, facts get banned, facts get altered. When you have a truth that's so kind of like, it's so hard to explain, it's so hard to understand, and books which talk about this truth, like Corpus Mescum, even the Bible, will tell you if you divulge this truth, you're going to be killed. So historically, this was a case that you have basically a set of ideas where if you actually openly talked about it, you were murdered, basically. I mean, Corpus Mescum chapter 13 warns you, don't talk about these things because you're going to be killed. Historically, that's always the case in Islam, in Judaism, in general, religion generally. Now, the critic of this idea might say that basically even in esoteric mysteries there are differences in opinion, but of course there are, because the ideas get changed. But when you actually trace things back in time, they realize the same ideas are to be found at the origin of the religion. So let me give you one example. I mean, Muhammad's teaching of kind of like the batin of like somehow we can become one with God, or this idea of it's called Wada al-Wujud, the essential unity of all being. It means that somehow we are all one, God is one, the oneness that God is, the oneness we are is one and the same. Now, someone might say, oh, but the Naqshbandi sect basically they believe a kind of qualified version of this. But then you see how the doctrine was changed in the 17th century. The doctrine of fana in Islam, okay, annihilation of the self in God. Again, this kind of union with God idea. Some might say, oh, this Sufi sect, this Shia sect doesn't believe in it. It's banned, but it's forbidden. But they realized that basically it was forbidden. Yes, in the 10th century, in Baghdad. But when you trace it back to the origin of Islam, the origins of these teachings in Hinduism, etc., and the origins of these teachings in Christianity, then you find a perfect convergence. Do you see? Mm. So from a superficial level, then people see all these differences and all these kind of like, even people who study comparative religion, even theologians, but they don't understand. You really need to dig in deeper to the actual, the history of religion and the texts. But ultimately, the really hard thing is that the truth is so hard to understand. That's why it couldn't be explained, and you were murdered for saying the truth. Really, you can't really gain the truth easily from reading books. So that's why I think I gained these insights into religion from my journey into the land of the Lotus Eaters. And I think it's only through direct experience that you totally get it. Mm. So you can have endless debates with people who even write books about religion, who don't actually get the core essence of religion. Do you see? Religion is a really, really complex thing, and it seems really multitudinous and differentiated. But at the core, once you really, really understand and through direct experience and also really analyze the history of religion and actually go through all the mystical texts and all the key metaphysical assumptions of the nature of God, you find a perfect unity. But if you can explain that perfect unity in pure scientific, philosophic, mathematical language, that is the clincher, isn't it? Yeah. You can see, if once you explain it, then of course people would have had these experiences of oneness, non-duality, being one with God, one with the universe. And when you take that all together, it forms a composite picture, which I think can really cut through all the nonsense and actually show a kind of unification of religion that I think is really pending, I think. And as we talked about the political implications earlier on, I think seriously, I think it's what the world needs right now, I think.
Yeah. So a couple of things then. I know we've spoken about, in one of your previous talks where I attended, we spoke briefly about Ken Wilber, who you had some sort of criticisms of, but he has this conception, and I'm not a fanboy exactly. I certainly have my own criticism, but he has this conception of the absolute, or the God, the idea of God, having a way to approach the concept, having a 3-2-1 approach to it. So it's the third person, where you speak about God as though he's over there, the second person as though you speak to God, and then the first person where you are one with God. You are God. You act as though you are. So what is the nature of God in this idea of the fractal reality system, if you had to sort of try and define it?
Well, I think ultimately in the system, essentially what it explains is basically in absolutely scientific terms, absolutely rational philosophic language. It explains how this idea of non-duality is absolute, can be understood rationally. So the idea that basically you have this experience of being totality of all existence and being God or the universe, it's not illusory. There's another way of explaining it. Maybe we'll do this in the next interview too. That it makes perfect sense. It's actually completely rational. So I think there is a state of delusion or illusion when you think you are this kind of tiny person, tiny speck in the universe, somehow separate from the universe, tiny speck in this tiny galaxy, in this tiny Laika, in this tiny great big universe, looking out in the vast universe, and that's normal consciousness, or I guess abnormal consciousness. I guess that's one state, and I guess the other state is basically when you experience yourself as being the entire universe in this body, I suppose, in this state. And I guess you call this kingdom of heaven, you can call this enlightenment, I suppose. I mean, but I think what the fractal brain theory does is gives a kind of and also this extrapolation of this life intelligence symmetry theory to the universe. It really gives a kind of a grounding to really kind of reintroduce the mystery for the 21st century. Now, we talked about Rupert Sheldrake and all these kind of New Age speakers like Deepak Chopra. And in a sense, this kind of spiritual knowledge exists in a kind of ghetto. It's separate from mainstream society. It doesn't have power. You have these kind of psychedelic hippies I used to hang out with, and these psychedelic shaman. They're on kind of outer fringes of society. Even someone like Rupert Sheldrake, even with his background, his qualifications, he's still in the outer fringes. Now the trick is to really push this idea into the mainstream, I think. And I think I see this, this life intelligence symmetry theory and the creation of artificial intelligence as a vehicle for doing that. Now, the one, I guess Ken Wilber, that whole axis, Ken Wilber, Andrew Cohen, Adi Dar axis, because Ken Wilber was an Adi Dar follower. I guess my problem is that basically that kind of stuff will never enter the mainstream because of the background and the lineage, I suppose. Do you know what I'm saying?
There's certainly like aesthetic issues with the movement, I think. Yeah.
I think to me, I mean, the fact that he's so passionately defended Adi Dar, I've got ex-friends who are followers of Adi Dar. But what I'm saying is, Adi Dar, he claims he's been the most enlightened person and the world teacher and the greatest world teacher there is. And I used to live actually downstairs from two Andrew Cohen ex-followers. It's completely random, who worked on his What is Enlightenment magazine in North London. Okay, I lived underneath them for 10 years. Nice people. So to get like inside information. The last I spoke to a lady just outside the house. I was picking up my kids, visiting my ex-partner. Andrew Cohen declared himself the world teacher. So he's basically bouncing back, trying to reestablish himself as a kind of spiritual teacher again. Mm. What I'm saying is that some of their followers get something from, Ken Wilber and even Andrew Cohen, even with all the, kind of like highlighted abuse now. It's not, basically it's a fact now, basically the abuse of his ex-followers. I mean, basically, some of his followers still get something from him. But what I'm saying is that Adi Dar, Andrew Cohen, Ken Wilber stuff will never enter into the mainstream. So that's why I kind of keep a distance from it. Mm. And even Deepak Chopra, even Rupert Sheldrake, basically, there's a kind of barrier between what they're doing and what the kind of wider world would accept. So what I'm trying to do is basically really establish the same sort of ideas which these thinkers are trying to, in their own kind of culty, new religious movement kind of ways or new age circles. I'm trying to make it into a kind of mainstream thing that actually anyone can actually understand it, even a militant atheist. That's my aim. A militant atheist, new atheist, whatever. They might not believe it, but they can't deny that's absolutely rational.
Mm. Yeah, I think I'm gonna skip a few questions to get onto. You mentioned the mainstream and how a lot of people aren't aware that psychedelics, substances and entheogens are really having a moment in academia and being researched by Imperial College and others, John Hopkins in the US, and they're being researched for their therapeutic potential. How might this sort of psychedelic renaissance be useful in the context of what you're saying?
I think even Sam Harris is getting into the game. I mean, he's always talked about it, but he's taken it in very small doses because he's been afraid. But he took 5 grams apparently about 2 years ago, and he's kind of like really going down the rabbit hole now, which is great. I think I think a lot of religion really came from psychedelics. I think in the background of all religion, is lurking in the background is psychedelics, even in Islam, even in Judaism, except Buddhism, etc. What I think is that the 60s and 70s really seeded the modern New Age movement, really seeded this interest in, kind of mystical knowledge, hermetic knowledge, whatever. And I think the current renaissance in psychedelia can really be the kind of final push that can really awaken a new generation of people to be the protagonists, to really do what the children of Woodstock could not do at that time. But this new generation, I don't want to call them Woodstockers. I mean, basically the psychedelic awakening in the late 60s and 70s kind of fizzled out, but it seeded what we have today. But I think this new kind of renaissance could be the push that could really see the kind of re-establishment of, you know what I'm saying, this Prisca Theologia, perennial wisdom. So the perennial wisdom returns. That's why it's called perennial wisdom. It keeps returning. And I think, okay, one, you have to articulate it in completely scientific, philosophic terms. But you also have to have a kind of like, I guess, a vanguard, a kind of group of people who don't just understand it intellectually, but have directly experienced. And they will be the vanguard that can really push this idea into the mainstream, I believe. Yes, so I think it's really, really important. Now, from a kind of therapeutical aspect, I mean, psychedelics is really, really important. But I think from a kind of spiritual, political aspect, I think it's more important that people get this kind of, you know, I guess, mystical experience from this kind of like a kind of return of this kind of the Institute of Eleusis for the 21st century, which many people are talking about anyway. So I think even people like Jordan Peterson are now kind of pushing this idea of kind of basically reawakening this use of psychedelics for the 21st century. And it's not just hippies, it's not just kind of new age people and counterculture people now. If people, you know, kind of on the conservative wing are also saying the same thing, then I think this could be maybe a critical factor, maybe, I think, in the unfolding of what's going on in the world today, I believe.
Yeah. So I really love the way that you are able to demystify a lot of these concepts, and, you know, your whole mission to sort of sciencify metaphysics and religion. So with that in mind, let's talk about magic.
Magic! Oh, right. that's a huge subject. Magic is a huge subject, and I know I gotta qualify this immediately, because people think magic, Harry Potter. We're going to go into land of fairies now.
Yeah.
Magic is a deadly serious subject. I mean, magic is a serious subject. Basically, the idea of magic gave rise to the modern world. I mean, really gave rise to the modern world of technology. I got to explain this. I mean, there's this idea of the Renaissance magus. So magus, magi, magic. Okay, Renaissance magus. And it said that Isaac Newton was the last magus. What does that mean? Okay, what does it mean? It means that there's an understanding of magic which is really scientific and technological and real, but also mysterious and spiritual. And in a sense, it was suppressed because it empowers people, and it's quite revolutionary. In a sense, this magic really was the secret of the Renaissance men: Leonardo, Da Vinci, Michelangelo, Giordano Bruno, etc. So it's a really powerful concept. So what it is, it's this. Okay, so okay, in a nutshell, what it is this. On a very simple level, magic means to manifest. Okay, so the kind of like formulation abracadabra, it's actually a kind of Hebrew Aramaic word. It means as I say, so I create. Okay, so that's a very simple thing. It just means, on one simple level, magic means to have something in your mind, in your head, and you manifest it in reality. That's what it means. So it means to manifest a painting, to manifest, I use this in my talks because it's utterly trite and simple, to manifest an ice cream. Okay, I feel hungry, I want to get an ice cream. You have to keep it in mind. You have to go to the shop, get money to the bank, and then you come back with an ice cream. If you lose the thought in your mind, you fail. Okay, so you don't come back with your ice cream. Anyway, look, you can manifest an ice cream, you can manifest a cathedral, you can manifest a new world order. Now, the idea in the Renaissance, from these key texts like the Corpus Metricum, New Atlantis, and Oration on Dignity of Man, there was a key idea in that to manifest things, you can explore nature. Okay, so nature, this white magic, Pica de la Mirandura writes, is basically involves the profoundest contemplation and then to the knowledge of all of nature. And he writes that basically the powers which the largesse of God has sown into nature to bring them to light. What he's talking about is essentially technology, because he also talks about that magic is essentially the highest realization of natural philosophy, i.e. science. So what are they talking about? They're talking about basically you explore nature, you discover her secrets, the laws of physics and the laws of chemistry and the laws of materials, and then you can create technology. That's what they're talking about. Now, the most famous utopian book, New Atlantis, by Francis Bacon, the key line is okay, the New Atlantis, the House of Salomon, which is the key institute in New Atlantis, gave rise to the Royal Society of Science in London, the midwife of modern science. Now, the key passage in New Atlantis is okay, the House of Salomon, the end of our foundation is the knowledge of causes and secret motions of things, and the enlarging of the bounds of human empire to the effecting of all things possible. Again, the same idea. And it really led to the idea of the Renaissance magus, total knowledge and total power. And what it means is that by having the total knowledge of nature to understand the physical world, you can then basically use that knowledge to create technology to empower yourself to shape reality, to shape matter energy. So that is magic. Now, that really gave rise to the modern process of science, called, the Royal Society. That's what happened, basically. But the thing of magic is basically the Renaissance men, based on their metaphysical cosmological assumptions, they were explicit. They were explicit in talking about two kinds of magic. They talked about black magic, which was selfish, and they talked about white magic, which, okay, in the words of Pico della Mirandola, who wrote the Oration on Dignity of Man, he talked about the white magic sedulously serves nature. Okay, there's a difference. Now, in terms of, to cut a long story short, imagine, Jedi Knights and Sith. So George Lucas was trying to communicate religious ideas, basically. There is a dark side and there is a light side. There's a side which is selfish and serves, myself, my family, my clan, my race in that order. Okay, which is instincts, which is Ayn Rand, which is basically selfish genes, which is base human instincts. Okay, we all have that. There's another kind of side, which is white magic, which basically sedulously serves nature and serves all humankind. Okay, now there was a dimension to magic, which basically, okay, in the Corpus Meticum, in the first book, the Pymander, there's a spiritual dimension. And they saw this empowering oneself as a means of spiritual transcendence. Is essentially Tantra, it's essentially Kabbalah. Now, the key passage is, because Hermes Trismegistus asks metaphorically, how does one pass or go into God? I become unified with Godhead again. Because Pymander describes the fall into normal reality, like the fall from Garden of Eden. But it actually explicitly tells you the way that the soul returns to God or Godhead. The explicit line is, okay, this is what happens. Those that know to be deified, okay, give themselves to the powers, becoming powers, they're in God. So again, this idea of power, but it's power to serve humanity and to serve nature. They saw it as a spiritual exercise in terms of gaining power to serve humanity, in the words of Francis Bacon, to bring forth a progeny of a spring of invention, to overcome to an extent and subdue our needs and our miseries. And one of the points of the 3-point Rosicrucian Manifesto, to cure all disease and malady. So see, there was this white magic that they believe, by pursuing science and creating technology and to heal the kind of infirmities and to satisfy human need. This was basically what they called white magic. What's gone wrong with the world is basically we have this technological world now, and it's black magic. You've lost those spiritual values, which basically gave rise to the Enlightenment and the Renaissance in the first place. You have this kind of technological beast, this modern industrial machine that's destroying the planet. So, okay, the other dimension to magic is this. Okay, white magic, black magic was this. Okay, there's a very, very kind of mysterious dimension to magic. Okay, what we've talked about so far is mundane, isn't it? It's just like creating technology. So what? Basically, you do science, you create technology. That's what happens in the world. There is this other dimension to magic, which really is magical, really is like scientifically magical. It involves serving humanity and sedulously serving nature. It works like this. Look, if there really is a destiny wave function, if there really is, we are bouncing back to a set origin. It means there's a purpose to the universe, there's a purpose to society, there's the purpose to the process of nature. The highly mysterious dimension to magic is this. If you truly align your will to the will of the universe, to the will of nature, to the will of the progression of history, if your will is truly aligned in a completely unselfish way, what will happen is you will find that the universe will conspire to help you realize your will. Now, unlike the kind of like New Age law of attraction, that magic I want to visualize my Mercedes Benz. I want to visualize checks coming through the post. I want to visualize my perfect partner. Then I'll get it. That's really kind of like a debased magic that kind of new age gurus sell to kind of, you know, like get people to come to their workshops. And if you didn't get your Mercedes Benz, you didn't get your pay rise, you didn't get your perfect partner, do law of attraction plus extra strength and you will. Okay. And this is like a born every minute. The kind of magic I'm talking about here is basically, it's not selfish. It basically, if you truly align your will to the universe, and basically, if that will is to do with the historical progression, you will find that basically against all odds, basically, things will miraculously happen around you. The destiny wave function will basically make things happen around you to realize your destiny, because your destiny has become part of the destiny of the universe. Then you truly become like Magus, Renaissance Magus, true magician. So do you get it? As a synthesis, it's basically, yes, it is knowledge. It is empowering yourself through that knowledge, through science and technology, through social technology, organizing society, how you interact with people. There is that dimension. It is the spiritual dimension that you're doing this in order to gain kind of, you know, spiritual transcendence, unity with Godhead. But at the same time, there is this mysterious dimension where things will happen around you to realize your destiny and your will that's become aligned with the universe, and it will seem completely miraculous, because against all odds, against all kind of like impossible, you know, opposition, you will succeed in what you're going to do. Just in a nutshell, that is magic.
That's great. Thanks. Yeah, there's so much, so much to think about there.
That was a mini lecture, wasn't it?
No, it was great. It was great. I just want to check how much time you have, and whether we should cache the rest for part 2, or have you got a few more minutes to answer some more questions?
I mean, seriously, I mean, it just feels like 15 minutes we've been talking, but we've been talking about an hour and a half, haven't we? Didn't we?
Yeah, an hour and a half, yeah.
Oh my word! Do you know? I think 90-minute concentration span is generally a kind of like a kind of. But we can let's do one more question, then we'll kind of like give save the rest for another session again.
Great. All right. Yeah, let's do that. Let me just pick one then from my can say, yeah, another occasion. Well, I think this leads on from what you were just saying, really, and it's probably a big finish kind of question. So how do you see this affecting culture and society? What's the great potential that you see? I mean, I'm a Green Party councillor, so it would be remiss of me to neglect the subject of our ecological crisis. Why are these kinds of ideas important to some of the very practical problems that we have as a civilization?
Okay, that's a huge question, and the answer is again we turn to history and what these metaphysical cosmological assumptions, what they led to. Okay, one, they led to, you know, the rise of science and technology, but it also led to a kind of I guess ideas of utopia, ideas of a better world. They really led to political revolution. So I think in terms of what's happening in the planet today, I think there is a kind of like, even, we're not just talking left-wingers or Marxists or Trotskyists, we're talking people on the establishment, the right wing, you know, calling for something has to change. There needs to be some kind of reset, some kind of revolution, some kind of system change. And it's really across the board. It's not just, you know, kind of like radicals anymore. It's basically even establishment figures recognizing basically we're heading off a cliff. So what I think the implication of these ideas are the same as what happened in history. Basically, they led to revolutionary movements. They basically led to the English Civil War. They led to the French and American revolutions. And I think it's what's happening and what needs to happen. Somehow you need a kind of like peaceful transition. You need a kind of system change that can somehow satisfy left wing and right wing. So what I believe is that, you know, there's not going to be a worldview or narrative that's going to be new, that's going to somehow, you know, get, you know, kind of left-wing people, right-wing people, different people of all religions on board. It's not going to be a new worldview or a kind of new cosmology or new metaphysics. What you need to show is basically the metaphysics and cosmology behind Islam, behind the Renaissance, behind Taoism, Buddhism, Hinduism, you know, Christianity, Judaism, etc. It's the same metaphysical, cosmological set of assumptions. And I think the new worldview really is a new narrative that can really bring about this great transition, is really the return of the old. And if really historically these these narratives of kind of transition and utopia and narratives of essentially system change and revolution, if they worked historically, then I think in terms of the modern world, you have a kind of like a transition ideology that can satisfy the right wing, because most establishment conservative right wingers, they're not interested in, when they talk about tradition, they're not interested in taking things back to kind of feudal serfdom and kind of like divine right of kings to rule and medieval times. What they're interested in is the stuff that the original left wing, i.e. the kind of revolutionary left wing that emerged from the Enlightenment, brought about, i.e. the modern world. But then you also satisfy the left wing, because you're saying, look, left wing, the left wing now today is embarrassing. It's basically, it's lost, it's forgotten its own values, it's forgotten its own kind of assumptions. By re-establishing what the left wing was originally about, those metaphysical cosmological assumptions which gave rise to the original left wing, the revolutionary left wing, then I believe you can reconcile left wing and right wing and bring them to a common cause. If the left wing and right wing voices are calling for this great system change, great reset, great revolution, then I think really these ideas have an implication for society in terms of, yes, system change, but also unity, for bringing people together, which, unfolding events in the Ukraine right now is exactly what the world needs. So I think that the implication is I think these ideas are critical for basically what many thinkers are saying needs to happen anyway, but they can't find these solutions because they're working in academia, they're working in little compartments, working in little kind of boxes. And basically what you're saying to these people, look, come out of the box and go into wider history, and then it's kind of like forgotten metaphysical cosmological assumption that basically your worldview was originally based on, that's been lost. If we can establish that through science, mathematics, and philosophy, then you can take people out of their boxes into this kind of wider box, into a kind of common cause. And I think that's really the key to kind of, I guess, bridging these divisions in academia, but also in society, and then get all these kind of divided peoples to kind of like, do this kind of like peaceful system change that everyone's talking about needs to happen anyway. It's a lot to digest, isn't it? It's a lot to unpack.
No, that's great, and I think that's a perfect place to finish today.
Really good. Yeah.
So okay,
amazing.
So thank you, Wai, and that was great. Thanks for all your work, and I appreciate you. How can people support and engage with your work? Where's the best place to find you on the interwebs?
I think I'll give you a kind of like a list of social media contacts.
Sure.
Kind of JPEG, and then
I
guess Facebook is good. I guess I got to get my social media internet presence together, really. I mean, I'll tell you what's happened. The coronavirus, COVID, has basically really accelerated the message that things have really finally come together in the past 2 years. So really, I've been in kind of introvert hermit mode for the past 2 years, but it's really been getting the message together over the past 20 years. But really, it's kind of funny timing that we're getting together now, because I'm on this kind of like verge of going into outward mode to communicate. So I'm really getting my social media and communication, I guess, machinery into gear. So, but in the meantime, I'll send you a list of links you can share with the audience.
Yeah, great. And we'll stick those underneath the video, as they
fantastic.
Those YouTubers say, don't they?
Yes, that's right. Yeah, that's right. Amazingly stimulating conversation. Again, when you're having fun and engaged in these really interesting ideas, time just flies. It really just, all of it feels like 20 minutes.
Yeah, this is great.